It's the bipartisanship of the welfare system, the warfare system, the monetary system, the challenge to our civil liberties. It all goes through with support from both parties. And I believe that we've had way too much bipartisanship for about 60 years.
One thing that government is supposed to do, and it says so here in the Constitution, is provide for the common defense. If people want to kill us, we need a military to defend us. But at a conference of conservatives, Congressman Ron Paul criticized conservatives who support an aggressive foreign policy.
They believe that we have this moral responsibility to use force to go around the world and say, you will do it our way or else. Well, force doesn't work. It never works.
Force never works? What about World War II? Force can work.
Defensive force, sure, it better work. You know, if you're a freedom-loving nation and somebody comes and attacks you or us, yes, we should use force in retaliation. So there's a difference in which way you're using the force.
Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer joins us now. He served 2 tours in Afghanistan, and he's now with the Center for Advanced Defense Studies. You differ with the congressman.
I do. I think we practically have to defend our equities. And this is where I think there's a clear division between using brute force without an end result in mind. And frankly, the bottom line, you brought up, John, you brought up World War II. Parmenides, a Greek philosopher in 485 BC, said, nature abhors a vacuum. We inherited an empire. I'm not saying it's the right thing or the wrong thing, but we have, for better or for worse, been the force of good on this planet. Not that we should be the policemen of the universe, but we have certain things that we, I think, are obligated to defend both by treaty and by our own values.
But the big thing is defending our interests. He implies that, you know, oil might be our interests. And yes, we have a right to defend our country, but to pose our will around the world, that's how we get into so much trouble and have gotten into so much trouble. And I've seen no benefit from it. You know, I was in high school during the Korean War, and we're still there. Vietnam, I was in during those period of time for 5 years. What a waste. And now we're in wars constantly, and we don't even defend ourselves well enough. We're out there just stirring up trouble because what do we have? We have a true blowback problem that we have to face up to. I mean, the whole idea of us imposing a dictator in Iran, the Shah, it came back to haunt us. It's still there today. And now we go into Iraq to impose our will on Iraq, and there was no threat whatsoever, zero threat.
Well, but Tony, you say
we virtually turned over Iraq to the Iranians. Now they're close allies of the Iranians.
I think it's an issue. Well,
you say we need to protect our oil interests.
Well, we do, and this is one of the things that we have again inherited by the fact of our strength. We have great strength. It should not be abused. I agree with the congressman. In many of those instances, we have made very bad choices as a nation. But what we have to do now is play this as a chess game. We have to use the resources we have to maintain the equities, and I use the equities in this case are the ability to have our people, the American people, have the way of life we've come to understand and appreciate, for better or for worse. And that means in many instances maintaining the supply of oil and natural resources that we have and enjoy.
That's rather frightening, because when you think about what we do, we're doing exactly that. There's no doubt about it. Our oil interests go over, they invest oil. Why do you think we're in Libya today? We have Britain, the United States.
I think we're in Libya because it was horrible to watch people be slaughtered by a horrible dictator.
Yeah, of course, they were never slaughtered. They just said fearful, oh yeah, like Saddam Hussein has a nuclear weapon and he's going to attack us tomorrow. But on the oil, our military becomes nothing more than a police force for our investments overseas. If there's a vacuum out there, who cares? I mean, why do you have to? Why are we have a moral obligation?
Well, I think if we have $10 oil at the pump, I think the American people would be very upset about that. This is the deal.
And if we didn't have our military presence,
we have made some
we would have $10 oil.
Well, we have made some very bad choices regarding independence of energy. I think the Congress will probably agree we've made some hugely bad choices. With that said, What we have left to do is find a way to maintain the supply we have until we find additional resources. Right now, for better or for worse, a lot of those resources are in the Middle East. Not only do we depend on it, our allies depend on it. Japan, Korea, all these other nations. And I don't know if you've all been there lately. We have done a great deal of good by having a presence there. Japan, Germany, Korea, Taiwan. Taiwan is another area. So we have obligations. These are our allies. We cannot midstream abandon our allies or our interests overseas.
And the entangling alliances really bother me. You know, we've had an alliance, you know, defend Taiwan. People say, oh, well, if Taiwan's attacked, tomorrow we have to send all these young people there to defend Taiwan. I think that's a bunch of baloney. We shouldn't have to do that. Why?
We have a treaty.
We have a treaty. The moral question is how can a generation 2 or 3 times removed write a law that says we have this moral obligation to automatically go to war?
Congressman,
you know, there's no right to take...
Let me answer that. For better or for worse, I grew up during the Cold War. I envisioned myself dying in the late 80s on a battlefield in Europe defending our equities in Europe. That's the way I came up. So at times, I think it's almost necessary to sacrifice some for the greater good. I believe that we were obligated then to defend the Europeans against the Soviet threat.
That's where we disagree.
From my Twitter page, someone who calls himself Dull Geek asks, ask him about immigration. He seems to support some very non-libertarian policies.
Well, I don't think I can answer the whole question there because there's a whole chapter in my book on immigration. But I take the position which probably doesn't satisfy too many on either end, because, you know, the purest libertarian viewpoint is totally open borders.
Right.
And I don't endorse that. I don't think we are quite able to do that as long as people can come in here and benefit from the welfare system, and they're compelled to, you know, be taken care of. I don't believe in the open borders, but I don't, you know, I don't like the idea of people wanting to build walls and fences and guns and thinking that the immigrant is the evil monster and the immigrant becomes you know, the scapegoat of everything. I think that's very, very bad. But it is a difficult problem. I do not support amnesty. I think if somebody sneaks across the border and somebody else is trying to follow the rules and can't get in, that they come across and soon they can become citizens and get to vote. So, but there's no way.
Amnesty that they should?
No, I'm not for amnesty. But it's absolutely impossible to think that anybody, no matter how strongly people feel against illegals, you're not going to round up 12 or 15 million people. I mean, that doesn't make any sense.
Yes, sir.
All right, Dr. Paul, could you make your case for why we should get out of the UN?
Well, it's sacrifice of sovereignty. I consider it unconstitutional to deliver certain powers to the United Nations. I think the advice the founders gave us is pretty good advice. No entangling alliances, and that's an alliance that entangles us in too many things. And even NATO is another one of those alliances. But you know, shortly after the UN was passed, we went to war in Korea under a UN resolution. The Congress wasn't even consulted. So I think it leads to nothing but trouble. If you like self-government, local government, state government over federal government, we certainly shouldn't consider the fact that we should have a world government. So I am opposed to all these international organizations.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, what is your take on the too big to fails? Because it seems pretty obvious that they're in need of an intervention, and they kind of have a money and power addiction. What do you say?
Too big to fail.
No, too big to fail is just a scare tactic for the big guys to get taken care of. So they say the world will come to end if General Motors would go bankrupt, so they get bailed out. Well, the truth is there were some good values to General Motors, and they should have gone through bankruptcy, and the good parts taken, and they should have been revamped.
What about the banks? We were told that if they don't bail them out, the whole system will collapse.
Well, that's what they're working on, what they did. They bailed out, and the whole system will collapse because it depended on the creation of $3.3 trillion by the Federal Reserve, and certain people got taken care of, but it brought on this horrendous recession. So yes, it's failed, but they tend to think we were too big to fail, we bailed them out, and everything seems to be okay. But I think the American people know everything is not quite okay. If you believe in a free society, believe in a Second Amendment, that's where your real protection comes from.